Okay, so this again is, were y'all ever able to see the PowerPoints when I, sort of, maybe a little bit? Okay, I'll try to show that for Tanner, maybe, okay, but then y'all can't see it, can you? Okay, you're good? Okay, all right, well, this is what I need you to write down, okay? The armistice, I've already basically given you this, but it is always remembered as the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. It's referred to that way. And again, this was the ceasefire. So there's not really going to be any more fighting after this time. And technically the war is over, and of course there's going to be jubilation, and everyone's happy because the Great War, the war to end all wars, is done. Or at least so they hope. Okay, go on to the next one. But then it is going to take a little bit longer for the Treaty of Versailles to be created. Now, where is Versailles? Do you remember this from world history at all? It is in France. Do you remember anything about Versailles? Do what? Louis the 14th. Louis the 14th had this big old palace built just outside of London. Not London, Paris. Just outside of Paris. And eventually he's going to move his entire court, the Estates General is all going to move in with him, and they live in luxury for the day, okay? You're in 1400, so luxury still doesn't have indoor heat other than a fireplace. So we're talking luxury, with cold, big old stone walls that were not conducive to keeping you warm in the wintertime or keeping you cool in the summertime. Back in those days, they would hang rugs, carpeting on the walls, and that was primarily as insulation. They were trying to keep some warmth into these massive luxury palaces. But the Treaty of Versailles, of course, was the best anybody could live at that point in time, and it is a huge place. I've been there. It's huge. So it is the Treaty of Versailles. All the countries are called to meet at Versailles in what is known as the Hall of Mirrors, which is literally a long, long hallway, but it was also used like a banquet hall. We think of a hall like a corridor, right? But lots of times they would have referred to a banquet hall because it was long and intended for these huge long tables, where you could set 75 people or 100 people at a dinner, because that has been the way they would have done things back then. And on one side is a wall of mirrors, and on the other side is a wall of windows. So if you can just imagine how bright it's going to be in there. And of course, this is again before electricity. So, they're always looking for ways in which they can heat the place and also light the place. So, in the Hall of Mirrors, this is where representatives from all the countries that were involved in World War I are going to gather, except one. Which one was left out, do you think? Germany. Germany was not invited to the table. Now, that was the first blow, okay, because always normally, when you have a war and it's over, you bring the winner and the loser together, and they come up with some reconciliations, like the Treaty of Paris that ended the American Revolution. You brought the United States, the new United States, together with its former colonial master, Britain, and they negotiated. I'll give you this, you give me that. We'll do this, you do that. Okay, but Germany's not even invited. They don't even get to come. Okay, so that's going to be the first blow to the Germans. Okay, now this is a picture of part of Versailles. Okay, again, this is just a small portion of it because it is, are you with me? Okay, 'cause I'm gonna have to come back there. Smack you down. I wouldn't do that. Not until you put your mask on anyway. Okay. But anyway, and of course they had all these fountains and gardens. They've got gardens galore all over the place at Versailles. It's a lavish place. And of course this gives you an example of what the papers would have looked like at the time. Peace is restored and at Versailles. Now the Big Four, and write that down, Big Four. I don't know if I have that on here. Yes, I do. But you can't see it because it's shrunk on the screen. The Big Four. These represent the Big Four allied countries. And they're going to be the main wheelers and dealers in the negotiation. Again, none of the belligerent countries are there, other than I'm not sure about the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria and Austria-Hungary, but they had all given up before Germany did. So it was kind of like that wasn't going to affect them very much. This is mostly about Germany, and so the Big Four fellas are from England. Just write these down. England. I actually gave you this when we first started talking about World War I, and I asked you to list people. I wrote them on the board. England was David Lloyd George. You remember when I put those on there on the board? Italy was Vittorio Orlando. Let me see if I've got them. Yes, right there they are. England was David Lloyd George of the United Kingdom, Vittorio Orlando of Italy, Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau of France, and Woodrow Wilson from the United States. So the Big Four countries is England, Italy, France, and USA. And then the Big Four representatives of those countries are George, Orlando, Clemenceau, and Wilson. So you need to know both of that, both, who they are and where they're from, and that they are the Big Four of World War I. In other words, these are going to be the leaders of negotiating the treaty. So really there's no belligerent nations mentioned there. They're not going to have much of a say-so, but especially Germany is not going to have a say-so. And again, it's in the Hall of Mirrors, and this picture kind of shows it. I don't know if you can see it there, but all of this is mirrors, and all of this is windows. And you see, it's not a hallway like we think of a hallway. I mean, this is a hallway like the gymnasium, like our gym, this is huge. But this would have been their dining, their banquet hall, if you will. Okay. Now, this is where we get into the nitty-gritty of what they did to Germany. These were the punishments that were placed on Germany. And before you start writing, just listen to me for a second. If we go back to these four fellas, Germany had, of course, invaded and taken France. They had damaged extensively into Italy, and they had damaged England, although they never actually took over England, but they damaged, and England and Italy and France lost hundreds of thousands of men in the war. So they had a big grudge. They were really mad at Germany, and they wanted their revenge. Now, the USA, we had lost a lot of men, and some women, of course, because men and women both fought in the war. But there was no turf lost. There was no invasion of America. We really, in all honesty, I think it's pretty safe to say that America had never been invaded by an enemy combatant until 9/11. We had never really had an actual attack, on our soil, so to speak, other than the Civil War, of course, and the American Revolution, the War of 1812. You got to count those, I guess. But for the most part, in modern history, we haven't had an attack except 9/11. But these countries all wanted revenge. I mean, they were hungry for revenge. Woodrow Wilson, though, in the United States, they didn't feel the same way. We did feel threatened by the Zimmerman telegram, but we didn't feel actual threats, immediate threats to our homeland. And that makes a difference when you're negotiating. So Wilson, see, is going to want to come up with an idea, a plan that is going to be much milder, much more calmed down. If they had listened to Wilson on some of these things, we might not have had World War II. At least it might not have been as bad as it was. But anyway, okay. So one of the first things they do to Germany is they take away their army. They reduce their military down to only 100,000 men. And that sounds like a lot, but for modern times and all, that is, of course, minuscule. They also created what becomes known as a demilitarized zone. Do you know what that means? I bet you fellas know what that means. It means there's no military. I mean, it's like you cannot have any military in this region. And they place a 30-mile wide zone east of the Rhine River, which the Rhine River kind of cuts Europe sort of in half, and away from Germany anyway. And all of that had to be demilitarized. If you have 100,000 men in troops, they cannot be anywhere near the border to where they might act like they're going into another country. They had to give up, since they did so much fighting with submarines and ships and the unrestricted submarine warfare, they had to give up all most of their merchant vessels. And then this was the real kicker. Not only did they have to give up their own vessels, but they had to make ships for other countries. Okay, we've just lost a terrible war. Now we've got to make ships and give them to, we don't sell them to, we give them to the nations that have been against us. So the idea was to squish Germany in and to keep them in with the demilitarized zone, and then to force them basically almost into slave labor, to make ships for the rest of the world, for other allied countries. Now they lost land. Remember that big I in Maine was building up your empire. Okay, well, they're going to lose a lot of land. They lose the Rhine River Valley, which is right in through here. This is kind of the Rhine run through here. And they lose their Saar Coal Valley. Germany is a lot like West Virginia. Coal is big in Germany. Matter of fact, I've ridden a train through Germany, and it looks a lot like West Virginia in many ways. So the Rhine River Valley, they lose that. They lose their Saar Coal Valley. They lose all their Asia and African colonies. Basically, they lose a total of 25,000 square miles. That there were 6 million people live there, and they were mostly German, which is also going to play a part when Germany starts to expand again, when they start to retake land with Hitler. A lot of the land they take, the people don't resist it because they're Germans anyway. And they feel like they're just being liberated back to their homeland, like Austria. But anyway, the Rhine River Valley. Okay, what do you know about along a river? The land, the actual soil. It's fertile, right. This would have been Germany's breadbasket. Okay, this is where they would have probably grown their wheat, their corn, things that they needed to provide sustenance for themselves. So they're going to lose that. And so that's going to be very, very important. This little section is given to Denmark. This becomes known as the Polish Corridor. Looks like a dog bone, doesn't it? But this becomes known as the Polish Corridor, and that's going to play an important role in World War II because that's one of the last things that Germany is allowed to retake before World War II actually starts, is what's called the German corridor. The Polish corridor. So that region was given to Poland at this time. So if you just look at the map, and I think I had you to do a map of 1914 Europe, didn't I? Okay, so here is what it looked like in 1914. Germany is huge. Austria-Hungary is huge. Bulgaria is fairly good size, and of course all of this is the Ottoman Empire. Okay, and then this is what it looks like afterwards. Well, maybe I can show you. No, that's still that's 1919. Okay, yeah. Afterwards, Germany's still large, okay? But Austria-Hungary are divided now, and even into other countries. Romania's gotten a lot larger. Bulgaria is smaller. The Ottoman Empire basically becomes divided up, and it's no longer the Ottoman Empire after World War I. Okay, yeah. I knew I had a scene where I morphed it from that to that. You can see where it's divided up into a lot of little different places. Now, another thing that they had to do, that the German people had to do, was they had to pay money, what's called war reparations. Wars are extremely expensive. Okay, so Germany's out of a lot of money because of the war, but so are a lot of other Allied countries. And so Germany has to pay the Allies $5 billion. That's just kind of at the beginning. They're going to have to pay more and more as it goes along. No, never mind. I thought there was something else there. And they had to mine their coal and give it to the Allies. So not only are they not able to use it for themselves, but now they have to give it to what was their enemy. And then they have to sign, this is probably one of the worst things, is called the War Guilt Clause. Basically, they say it's all our fault. Was it all their fault? No. Who started the war? Austria-Hungary. So it really wasn't all their fault. It'd be kind of like you and your brother or sister or cousin or somebody's arguing, fighting, and fussing, and your mom comes in and says, Savannah, say you're sorry. And you're not sorry. Not at all. You want damage. Want revenge. But you have to say it's your fault. You have to say it's all your fault. It's just all of these things are humiliating. Not only are they economically disastrous to Germany, they have to give up all their submarines. I didn't mention that, but they do have to give up all their submarines. But it's economically disastrous to them. It's going to be hard for them to sustain themselves. They've lost their breadbasket, the areas where their food is created. And this cartoon is kind of cool. This, of course, is supposed to be, let me finish this real quick. This is the peace treaty. And look how bandaged up and banged up and limping and carrying on this fella is. He's really hurt. Okay, so that is exactly what it was like when it was all over. So this is going to cause Germany to want revenge. And so for 20 years, this situation smolders until Adolf Hitler comes on the scene. Okay, so we'll stop with that.